Nice to see you all here. And we will basically jump in right away into the session. The easiest way to learn test automation. Well, first of all, let me give you a short heads up. What is this will be about? We will talk about how to learn test automation, how to practice, the easiest ways to do it, the main ideas you need to learn, what is shared across the board with all the tools, and as a bonus, we will actually talk about what are those concepts that you need to learn, what are the basic best practices, and I'll show you a very short demo on how to practice, the easiest way to practice for test automation. All right. So what are we going to be talking about today? We'll be talking about mostly automation for end-to-end tests for web and mobile. Well, I personally strongly believe that the end-to-end tests are the most important tests you can have for your system because they reflect how your actual end users will be using your system. We will not be talking about at this point API automation, anything for IT devices or cars or anything like that. All right, let's start. Did you know that 70% of all test cases in 2022 are executed manually? It's very widespread. If you think this is an exception for your organization, it's actually not the case. Most probably you are around the average. And because it is very hard to scale manual testing, you just can't run all the tests quickly enough in order to be able to respond to all the changes engineering are doing. What happens is companies are resulting in $1.7 trillion losses across the globe due to software bugs because we couldn't test everything quickly enough. So this is a huge, huge problem. So however, say like there is a Selenium, what's the problem? Why is this happening? And you just can't write a lot of tests. There are certain problems with it specifically related to how tests are being developed. So why is a challenge to have Selenium tests, and why Selenium have been around since what 2006, and it's still only 30% in 2022 on average across projects that existed even for more than 10 years. And that's because of two problems. Number one is the fact that Selenium, when it was designed, the internet was very different. Right now, the HTML we use today is not that structured text as it used to be. It's all just divs in order to locate the elements, and therefore, if you're trying to rely on details of implementations like XPath, names, IDs, and so on and so forth, the test will constantly fail. That's important, and I'll talk about it later. Actually, it's so bad that you can't imagine how bad it is. So it's probably the number one reason why companies don't have automation in the first place, covering 100% of their test cases. This is one. So this test maintenance definitely taking a huge toll. And number two, look at the code on the left. You have to be an engineer in order to be able to understand that. It's just hard to write and maintain. Just the sheer number of lines of code compared to modern tools like testRigor is huge, and that test is oversimplification of what you would do to actually test a login. There will be much more code spread between multiple classes, even to just test a login. All right. It's actually so bad that it's a full-time job to just maintain tests at about 300 tests per person. So in particular, this is why it is kind of nonsensical for us to teach you Selenium, because if you wanted to test Selenium, you couldn't even do anything. It not only will take you several weeks to just set up environment, then it will take you a huge amount of time to write tests. And then if it's a real application, not the one you have just created yourself, you will not be able to even maintain that test in the first place. You can even show it to your manager, because by the time you'll be showing it, it will be outdated. It won't run anyway. So there is a little bit a better way. This is the old way of how people were building automation. You have to learn programming language. When you need to learn automation concepts, usually on the job, and then you slowly build some tests after you set up environment and so on and so forth. And then you just will be completely full-time on test maintenance for the tests which you wrote and tests which you didn't write. Trust me, I don't believe this is fun. The new way of doing that in 2022 is you do need to learn basic automation concepts. There is no way around that, trust me. So in order to understand how automation is different from manual testing, you have to understand test automation concepts, and we will be talking about it in this video. Next, you can basically, but it's not that a big deal. So those automation concepts, if you distill them to the concepts themselves, are very straightforward. Then you will be able to quickly build your automation using AI tools like testRigor will help you to practice and build it very quickly. And then there is almost no time on maintenance. If you build your example for your manager 2 months ago, it will still work now. Unless, of course, application changed dramatically to a point where functionally it's completely different application. And then, of course, you'll be able to just literally copy-paste test cases to make them executable. I might touch that part in a second. All right, so let's get into that. So basics of test automation. All right, so we will go through 2 parts. We'll talk about the properties of test automation. We'll talk about best practices a little bit. And at the end, we will practice a little bit together. I'll show you how to practice those concepts as easy as possible. The concepts of test automation is something which is applicable across the board. It does not matter what tool you're using. You can learn concepts of test automation on one tool. As soon as you understand the concepts, you will apply it on another tool. It doesn't matter. Moreover, it will actually make learning of a new tool order of magnitude easier, because you will know what to look for and how to build the test, and all you would need to just find out how to do it in a new tool. Anyway, without further ado, let me jump into the key properties of automated tests and how is it different from manual tests. So number one is there's actually only just 3 of those compared to manual tests. Let's say you have a test documented as a test case in some shape or form. In order to, how is it different from an automated test you would write? So our number one is repeatability. When you write a test case for manual execution, you might not pay attention to that. For example, if you were to write a test to register on Twitter, then you might just say, hey, like, use this email and register. This is fine and all, and people who understand will be able to use it when testing manually, because we understand that you'll have to use some other email next time. That's not a big issue. You as a human will be able to understand that. However, automation is far more specific. You need to be explicit about things, and you need to be explicit to a point that your steps, which you specify in your automation, must be executable literally exactly as written. And the number one property is repeatability. So once you have created a test, which let's say signs up with Twitter, then you should be able to run it second time. And the second time, if Twitter itself didn't change, your test must succeed. That's the whole point of automation, right? If you should not produce so-called false positives where your test will fail, whereas actually there are actually no issue going on. Like you must make sure that if there is no changes in the product and your test ran once, then the same test run needs to be able to run multiple times. You should be able to run it second time, third time, fourth time, and so on and so forth. In particularly, usually it's achieved with unique test data generation and use of variables. For example, basically, example would be with signing up again with Twitter. You would need to generate a unique email every single time you go through sign up process. You can't create multiple Twitter accounts with the same email. And you would need to use variables. We'll talk about it in a little bit more details a little bit later, in order to be able to store that email which you have generated, to like check this email, get data from its email, and so on and so forth. Well, next concept is the variable. So you need to be able to save the data then and then use it for the test. This variable, you can think of those as boxes with labels. So what variable is in a sense, it's just a label you put on a box, and in the box is your actual data, which is a variable. For example, if you just generated a unique email, you put it in a box, the contents of the box is the email itself, and the label on the box is a variable. So you refer by the label, but what you refer to is actually the email you have generated. So the next is already on the border between best practice and key property, and that is data-driven testing. In some cases, you need to validate that your form doesn't go through if any, for example, if any of the fields is left blank or any of required things is left blank. Therefore, there are like literally could be 20 or 30 tests which do basically exactly same thing. It's exactly same steps. And it probably would be a little bit of a waste to write 30 tests to test each individual scenarios. So there is an easy way to do that. You can create one test which does it, and then you can use data sets where you can add different rows for different sets of data you'd like to test to validate that your unfilled form does not go through. So it's a more or less straightforward concept, but you need to understand how to deal with it to become next level, more efficient automator. All right, so next part is best practices. And mind you, there are far more best practices than I listed in here. There's a lot of them. We can just talk about 1 or 2 hours just about best practices on their own. But I believe those 6 which are listed here are the key and the most basic and the most important ones. If you understand those best practices, then the tests you write most probably will be considered as great tests by your colleagues, management engineers, and so on and so forth. And again, so here everything is more or less self-explanatory and straightforward. So number 1 is a test should end with a validation. Think about it. This is what distinguishes just a sequence of steps from a test, right? You do some kind of a validation at the end, because if you do not, what might have been happening is you clicked on a button and you do not know if click on that last button in your sequence of steps is succeeded or not. So this way you kind of leaving out this last step, and you don't even know if this button was even clicked or not, because you tried to click it, and if it was what you intended or not, you do not know. So in order to overcome it, in order to make it a proper test, you would want to add a validation always at the very end of your test, where you would validate that the last action was successful, and you actually the whole sequence of steps resulted in what you would expect in this state. There is a question: should I use validations inside the test, like which are not the last step? And there are multiple trains of thought on that, and multiple groups have different opinions. And because it's very opinionated, and each approach has plus and minuses, I would just not mention it in here. But as the best practice is to have a validation, that's for sure. So next is test must be stable enough to be used in CI/CD. If you think about it, the whole goal of the fact that you are writing automation is that at some point your tests will be executed automatically. That relates very much to original part when we talked about repeatability. So basically, the point is that if you have a test, you want to be stable enough such that engineers can use it to validate that their code working fine on a dev environment, or automatically on staging environment before it is promoted to production. The whole point of CI/CD is to reduce human effort. The whole point of automation is reduce human effort on mundane things. And if your test needs attendance every single time it runs, that does not help. That does not help to reach the goal of automation. Automation's goal is to make sure that at the end there is as little to no human effort in order to validate the new change as it's technically possible. And this is a little bit of a loaded one because it includes a lot of things you should be checking and making sure in order it is stable. Well, of course, you would want to probably use a proper tool which are actually more stable than Selenium. You should not rely on details of implementation because details of implementation will change and tests will fail. You must rely on something which will most surely stay and indicates a proper action. Next, of course, there is points related to data. Again, it's a balancing act between generating unique data specific for the test every single time run and actually relying on some existing data, as well as making sure you address properly working with third parties and various systems and so on and so forth. There's a lot of complexity, could be a topic on its own. But point being, the stability is very important because the whole, when you develop automation, you have to remember the whole point of automation is to reduce human effort as much as possible. Next is, the test is very easy to understand. Well, we are not living in a vacuum. We work with teams. We work with other people. And there might be tomorrow, there might be another person who will take over your test and might need to change, maintain it, or do something else with it. So if you make your test easier to understand, you are actually doing a really big help to your company and to that person who will be maintaining your test in the future. This is one. And second, you yourself might be maintaining your tests sometime in the future, maybe several months from now. And if by looking at the test, you can't remember what did you do and what was going on, it will just waste a lot of your time to just refiguring out yet again what's up. So the easier you'll make it to understand, the easier it will be for everyone to deal with it and save gigantic amount of time. So next is the test requires as little maintenance as possible. On top of just easier to understand is more generically, if you can write it the way such that it will be easy to adapt to new changes as much as possible, again, it will save huge amount of time. Moreover, that is probably the number one time saver period whatsoever in working with tests. So it's definitely a huge best practice. And there are a lot of different details. We'll go through some of those in the example in a minute. But remember that maintenance is one of the top goals when you're creating a test. Next is test is independent. It can be run in parallel with all other tests. Well, again, so when we're creating test cases for manual execution, we might not pay attention that There might be intricate interdependencies, in which order you run those, and so on and so forth. And as a human, you can, of course, go back and forth and do something and fix something up, and you understand why this is failing and what else you need to do, and so on and so forth. So you might be able to adapt as a human. However, when you are running your test, automated test automatically, one of the goals in particular is to be able to run your automated tests as fast as it's technically possible. And that in particularly mean that there shouldn't be back and forth, even if you employ some kind of fancy AI. You want to make sure that your tests are executed as fast as possible, so that you get feedback as fast as possible, so that you save your time, engineers' time, and in general go home earlier instead of just sitting and waiting when tests are done. And when we're talking about end-to-end tests, the number one way to speed up test execution is actually parallelization, so that you can run all of your tests in parallel. That will dramatically reduce the time to execute the tests. This is one, and it is a balancing act to achieve that. I mean, in theory, you could create the data which is needed by the test in the test itself. This is great. However, sometimes it might be impractical because the amount of test creation might be gigantic. So you might end up relying on some existing data which already in the system in order to be able to execute your tests faster. So it must be a balancing act. You must apply common sense in order to figure out which parts needs to be generated and might be affected by tests running in parallel, and which can be reused. As you can see, a lot of things I'm saying here, you need to apply common sense. So this is best practice, but you also always need to understand the end goal. If you understand the end goal and go back down from there, you'll be able to figure things out. And finally, it's a basic one. Credentials are stored separately from the test. That is kind of the early mistake that sometimes new automation engineers make. You might tend to just enter the password and literally type the password into password field in the test itself. However, the challenge, there are two challenges in there. So number one, it is not very secure. You're exposing your password in plain text, so anybody can see that. So basically, you are sharing de facto your password with everyone, which might not be ideal for security purposes. And number two, which might be even more important, is you making it a little bit harder on yourself than to maintain your tests. So as you know, in a lot of systems, we're often a requirement where password needs to be changed on a regular basis, one way or another. So passwords do tend to change. And if password changed and you reused it across the board, then you have to go to all of those places where you used it and change it. That is why it is better if you store it separately in the test data in form where people can't see it, and use that password. So this way, not only it's not visible to other people, but also it is very easy to change it in just one place.
Okay, so are you ready for some questions, Artem?
Yes, let's open up.
So one question is, does testRigor cater for the security of the credentials used needed as data, and how?
Yes, so testRigor does help. testRigor will hide your passwords. It won't be visible to other people, and testRigor encrypts the data in transfer and at rest.
Okay.
So,
and people are asking if this will be recorded. It is being recorded, and I will be sending a link to you when you registered through email, so you'll be getting a recording of it. There's two more questions. One, can we see some practical ways for how the tool works? And then the other one is, can you please demo one end-to-end test case covering all fields like text box, drop down, frame windows, and data-driven?
yes, we will try to cover as much as possible today. Before I jumped into that, I want to also mention that you shouldn't shy out from using AI. There are a lot of uses of AI. It basically helps out in test writing itself, detecting of element, making sure your test is more stable, and adapting your test to potential changes. All right, so now we will switch gears and we'll do some examples. I will be doing examples on testRigor system itself. And I want to talk about a couple of points here. So number one is, I believe testRigor is the easiest way to practice your automation skills. So whatever we talked about, and we'll share both deck and the recording, you will be able to practice those for free on a free account on testRigor, using as little time as possible and saving as much time as possible. So you'll be able to try and learn all of those concepts. We believe in testRigor. testRigor is the most efficient and easy way to do it, because you wouldn't be distracted by setting up your environment or dealing with minute changes in the system under test and so on and so forth. Like, it will be very easy. What testRigor is, very quickly, it's a way to express steps in English, and testRigor will execute those steps from end user's perspective, emulating how a human would run those steps. And of course, you can group those and give them names like in functions. And let's do Twitter example. And I'll show you how to deal with how to practice, and I'll show you a couple of concepts right there on that particular test. So let's go to, if you go to twitter.com, let's copy the URL. This is where you'll provide the credentials. We're not going to be doing that because we will be testing sign up, and testRigor can generate tests for you. We don't need that. So we just created a test suite. Okay, now you can just go ahead and type in all of the steps in here in plain text. However, testRigor also provides you with a plugin for Chrome, which will help you to record some of the steps. And it's very easy to find the plugin. I'll show you in a second how to do it, but you can literally go to Chrome Web Store and find testRigor there. All right, so one important distinction, and this is what I was talking about, like then I was talking about the basics, the concepts of automation, is that what we are recording steps. And there is sometimes there is an effort to make an actual test out of your steps. So test and steps is not exactly the same thing. So you need to make sure that your test can run more than once, and that usually that there's some kind of a validation at the end, which actually validates that what you want to achieve is achieved. Anyway, so however, you can help yourself recording some steps. Let's click here. Let's put some name here. Let's use email. Type any kind of email in there. We will be changing that. Let's specify some date as a birth date. So I'm trying, what I'm doing in here is I'm recording steps for sign up flow, at least part of the sign up flow on Twitter. And click sign up, and we can't proceed at this point because there's a need to be a verification code, which we'll deal with in a second. Okay, let's stop. And this is the steps. testRigor can automatically detect if you're logged in or not, and then log in automatically. In this case, it's misfire. We don't need that. Like as you can see, remember, testRigor is a way to express steps in English from end user's perspective. This is what it's done. We don't need clicking on email. There we can just enter data into email, and that's it. And this was use email instead. It changed to use phone instead when I clicked on this button. And then we entered June 5, 1993, click next, next. And I believe it didn't record, but we also click sign up. All right. What I will do here, I will add and run. Click add and run here. You should only do it once because otherwise it will create duplicates. Go back. This is my test. I'll expand it, cancel it. I don't want to run it yet. And I'll continue modifying it here. So why I prefer to do it is because when you enter testRigor, so we constantly working on improving the experience of building, modifying tests in testRigor, whereas in the recorder is just as simple as possible. So for example, you can expand by clicking this button and you have much more real estate. It's easier to understand. Okay, so here, as you can see, this is a good example of steps, and when steps are different from a test. And this is a good example of repeatability. So this, if you were to write sign up like this, it will not run second time because it's trying to reuse exactly the same email. That's why I didn't care what email I used, because you can't reuse the same email. You need to be able to use a new email every single time. For that, we need to generate email. There's keyword generate, which we use. And you can click on documentation. You shouldn't look it through for certain things. Specifically, you should really learn referencing location section in order to understand better how to use testRigor in certain cases. But in this case, it's straightforward. We need to just generate unique email. There is a specific command just for that, generating unique email. We just literally copy it, and we will replace our entering static email div, the command which we copied, which generates unique email, and then it enters it into email field, and it saves it as a variable and give this variable a name or label, if you will, new email. So you can refer to this email by saying new email. Moreover, this is a special generate unique email because it's generate unique email such that we actually can check the email, which is exactly what we are going to do here. So we're checking that email to stored value, and stored value is a special word, meaning that we're going to use variable instead of verbatim specifying the email. So we're checking that email which we have generated earlier was received. All right, so we'll start from that, and we will do one more thing to reiterate on another concept in a second. So basically, in testRigor, a good thing is you don't have to have a powerful computer. You don't have to set up anything. Once you write the testRigor will run on a powerful server executing your tests in the cloud. So it's just completely serverless. You don't need to worry about that, hey, you updated your Chrome version or anything like that. It will continue to work. testRigor will manage all the versions and everything for you out of the box. So you don't have to worry about it. Anyway, so we went through the steps. We ended up in this asking verification code, and that command actually got the email. This is our email, and we need to now extract the code and use it to enter. So there are multiple ways how you can do that. You can do it by template. You can say, hey, I need something which has 6 digits in it. This is one way of doing it, but we'll be doing it differently. I believe a better way to do it is to refer to this code using relative applications. Specifically, we have text above it, and we can use text above or subset of text above to refer to text below it, which is exactly what we will be doing. So we need to grab this code. So for that, we'll say grab value from text below. So see, like I'm referring to text below and this verification code. I need to use the word these, just verification code is not going to cut it because verification code is used in several other places in the text. But this verification code, those 3 words are unique to this paragraph. So I need that to identify that paragraph. And say it as code, for example. Then we need to switch back to Twitter. So all those tabs are indexed. So the first tab will be tab 1. And then all we need to do is we need to enter that code which we got. So we're using variable. Remember, we saved it as a variable. So the code is inside the box and the label on the box is code. So we need to refer to the contents of the box, not just verbatim enter the word code, but we need to get the data from that box, which is labeled code. For that, we use variables, and therefore we say stored value, which means that we are using a label to refer to the data instead of just typing something verbatim. Code in our case into, I believe it was verification. Code is a field name. And we do update and retest. So basically, I'll expand it here. So we went through several concepts here. So top level repeatability, that our test should be able to run several times. This is one. A second concept is generation of unique data, because you can't go through with exactly the same data. So you we were generating the email. And the third part is use of variables, which we did twice. So one time we used a new email to store the email, and another time we'll use code. Anyway, let's see how did it go through. So this is how it looked like. testRigor will highlight again. This is another reason why it is just easier to learn concepts using testRigor. It will highlight you what it's doing on the screen. So it highlighted this text, this paragraph, and highlighted area below it to indicate what does it mean to do something below this text. And it highlighted the code it grabbed, which is this 755.787. And then we switched and entered the code. Let's see, 755.787. Looks like it did the good job here. And that is an example of a test which uses several concepts in automation, and how it is easy to just learn those concepts using testRigor. Now, next, last part I will be talking about before answering the questions is how to get yourself a free account. It's very straightforward. You just go to testRigor.com, and then you click on sign up. Then the free options. There is a public open source, free for non-commercial use. You feel free to just create an account. Just remember that whatever you do there is a publicly available information and searchable on the internet. So you shouldn't do anything related to the employer probably. And of course, if you do need to keep things private to do a demo later on for your employer, you can always create a free trial account there. But this open source republic will forever remain free. So click get started and create an account. Okay, so on that, let me start answering the questions.
Yes, Artem, we have a question. This person is a beginner to testing, and they have just begun doing manual testing. And they want to know how to find a balance between manual and automation. And what's the best balance between manual and automation testing?
Well, you have to. I'm the wrong person to ask. The answer, unfortunately, like in many cases, is it depends. And your best bet is to actually discuss it with your manager and tell them, hey, I want to learn or help out with automation, depending on what you are trying to do, and discuss then and how you'll be doing that. So what we have seen across the board with our customers. So number one, I've never seen any manager say no to learning automation for manual testers. So like they'll support it 100%. Number two, there's oftentimes gaps between tasks when you need to test something. Engineers are not ready yet for you to retest. This is when you can switch to automation and do a little bit more while you're waiting for your next task to be ready. So there's always sometimes in between things where you can do automation and switch automation. So if you're asking from a company perspective, it should be a growing function. So initially, it probably could be a slow start, but eventually it should be more and more. And it's kind of a self-fulfilling, self-helping thing, because the more you automate, the less you need to do to test manually, the more time you have to automate, and it's just very quickly grows. It's actually very, very helpful, and from company perspective, it's this kind of growing function.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, does testRigor cater for other browsers or only for Chrome?
Yes, it's very easy to run the same test on other browsers as well. You go to settings, multiple browsers,
Yeah,
and add browser of your choice in there. Let's do Edge, for
when you
example.
set up the test suite too, you choose which browser you're using an operating system, right?
Yes, so you can select it once you're creating the suite. You can change it at any point going forward. Heads up, if you're using free account, you'll be limited to Ubuntu-based browsers, but you can still have a couple. You can do Chrome and Firefox to see how it works, but you can run on multiple browsers, on multiple OSs at the same time. Like once we saved it, you go back, you can rerun the whole test in test suite section, or you can rerun the test individually. And if you do that, you see like there is now tabs in here appeared, one for Ubuntu Chrome, one in Edge. You can switch between them and see how each of them ran. In addition to that, you can also open the specific execution. So this is execution link. If you open it up, this is unique link for this particular execution at that particular time. And as you can see, there are two browsers running at the same time. You can see for each step, how did it do on that particular step in that particular browser.
Okay, so we have a lot of questions coming in. So the next one, does testRigor cater for thick client applications, APIs, and mobile apps?
testRigor does test web applications on desktop, web applications on mobile, native mobile applications, APIs, and you can do it all in the same test, like switching between, say, native mobile and web back and forth. It's very easy. And we are releasing native thick client desktop application testing soon.
Okay. The next question, in the demo, Artem inputted a code which was generated by Twitter. When this test is rerun, will this code need to be updated every time?
It is a different code every time. So as you can see, remember it was 7 something something, and now it is 203.355. Then this is for Ubuntu Chrome. If you switch to Windows Edge, in that case, it was 443.744. But this is why we use the concept of variable. Remember, we're not hard coding that code, but instead we're grabbing the value from the screen, say using command grab value, and saying, hey, I need to grab some text from the screen below this text and save it as a variable. So this is exactly what I was talking about when I was talking about the variable being an important concept to learn for automation. It is a programmatic concept. Unfortunately, there is no workaround. And in some cases, you have to learn it irregardless. I know it's a kind of an effort to do it. Might take a little bit of time for you to internalize it, but that's an important concept to understand, and hopefully testRigor will make it as easy for you as possible. So like in this case, we're grabbing the code from the screen, and then we're putting it into that box, which is called like a variable. And like we refer to that code as a code. And then it's in a sense dynamic. So it's different every time you run the test, because every time Twitter will send you a different code, And therefore, when you grab that code from the screen, it will always be a different code in that box. However, you don't have to know the code itself. All you need to do is just to know that label on the box, which is name of the variable. In our case, it is code, to refer to that code. And this is what we do later on. Once we grab that text, when we entering it, we are referring here to code which we grabbed previously. Basically, what we're doing is that we're going and finding that box with the label code, and we're getting the contents of that box, meaning that the contents which we have grabbed previously and put to the box, we use that contents now to enter it into a verification code field.
Okay, and we have 2 questions and we have 2 minutes left. The next one, can tests be scheduled in the test suite?
Yes, of course. You can go to settings, advanced, scroll down, and we call it monitoring. And you can set up monitoring, let's say every 24 hours at a certain time. So your test will run every 24 hours in a specified time, or you can do it weekly or something else.
And the last question, are there situations where testRigor is not the best choice? And are there limitations we should be aware of?
Yeah. testRigor had not been designed to test games. testRigor had been designed to help you out a lot, to test systems which have a lot of forms and tables. However, like gaming is completely different, it's time dependent, every microsecond might matter in games. So this is, testRigor just had not been designed for those kind of specific scenarios. So this is one. And second, until we release desktop testing, we're not testing desktop yet. But other than that, testRigor is a superset of Selenium. Anything you can do in Selenium, you can do in testRigor. There is a way to actually, we'll update the documentation to put link on it. There is a way to write actual code in JavaScript on top of testRigor commands if you need to achieve something very, very sophisticated. Although testRigor have been being such that you should almost never or never ever require that. We have a lot of companies which use not a single time the code outside of testRigor itself. For example, like there is a construct saying until, so you can say, for example, click on this button until you reach a page which contains certain information. So that is still in user-readable format, and it's still not really a programming, and it will avoid you to write very sophisticated, complex code to just achieve the same.
Okay, that is all for questions. We do have, there's another question here about online tutorials to learn how to use testRigor. We do have a page on our website called tutorials, and that has a number of videos that can help you get started. So we are at the top of the hour, and I think we've answered most of the questions. We'll get back to you if we didn't. Thank you for joining us today and giving us part of your day. We look forward to seeing you at the next one, and I'll be sending out a link to this recording. Thank you, Artem, and everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.